Hello everyone, welcome to this new Death Among the Stars battle report. This is going to be the first look at the new activation system. So the previous video we did, I've renamed to Old Activation System. Now, apart from that, there's been a few other sort of minor rule changes here, but nothing as large as the activation system change. So we're mostly going to focus on running through that. But as this is maybe the first video a lot of people are going to see related to this game, we are of course going to run through the rules as well as we play out the game, so you can get to see what games of Death Among the Stars will look like. The scenario we've got today is actually, it's not currently named in the book, but it's one of those that you'll recognise as Secure Ground from Age of Alchemy, our other game. It's where the two sides are looking to occupy as many of the quarters of the table as possible. So at the end of the game, we will divide the table up evenly, and then we will work out which models are in which side, and then tot up the different quarters that they have available. The side with the most quarters will of course be the winner. Now the two groups we have today is the Bloodstone Mercenaries on this side here, and then the Zeta Mining Corporation on this side here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to bring the camera in and we are going to show you the two groups, show you the weapons that they're armed with. Don't worry if something doesn't make sense right at this moment. What we will do is, as we go through the video, we will explain how the different things work and how all the model sort of weapons work, actions and various other things. So if you keep watching, you'll learn more about the game as we go on. For the Bloodstone Mercenaries, we have a comms operator with ballistic carbine, two ex-soldiers with ballistic carbines, an ex-soldier, actually no, a drop trooper in this case with a energy carbine, another ex-soldier who has a chemical launcher. We have a heavy gunner who has the big bore cannon. We then have a grenadier who has the energy grenade, and on the end we have two assassins. For the Zeta Mining Corporation, or the ZMC, we have two ex-soldiers with ballistic rifles, two heavy gunners with energy big bore cannons, a comms operator with a ballistic rifle. We then have a worker robot who just has a chemical pistol on this arm here. We have a fleet officer who has an energy auto pistol. And then finally we have another energy big bore cannon, which is on the back of this war robot here. As we can see, that is the table now set up ready for the game. As we can see, my opponent who's playing the Bloodstone Mercenaries has set themselves up on this side, but we will make a note that one of their models, who's right over here in this back corner, they're not deployed there. That is them ready to come on the first turn because they are the drop trooper. However, in terms of their leader, because both of us have to pick a leader, they have gone for the comms operator over here, the one that we showed off at the beginning. Coming over to my side, you can see I'm set up in the same line. This is a 6-inch on from the table edge deployment line, one of the 3 deployment types that are actually in the game at launch. And I also have chosen my comms operator as the leader, who is right there up against that building. Now you'll notice that on the table, each of the models have been marked up with a token. That is part of how the new activation system works, that when a model is activated, the token is removed, and then we know who has already gone for that turn. Speaking of, we're going to go into turn 1 itself, and we're actually going to show you how the activation system works, and we will take it from there. So to start off in turn 1, for the activation system, you'll notice we have this big double-sided token with a 2 and 1 on it. This will be significant, as what we're about to do now is roll off to see who gets the priority for this turn. So my opponent's going to roll and gets a 2. I'm going to roll and get a 3. So what that means is I have priority because I rolled the highest, and I have that priority by an odd number, 1, so it will stay on the number 1 side. What that now means is that each of us will get to activate one model of our choosing before play passes to the other player. If the difference between the two numbers was, let's say, a 4 and a 2, so it was an even number, then this would flip to being on the number 2 side, and it would be 2 activations per player before passing over to the other player. So for my first activation of this turn, we take the token away from the model we wish to activate, which is this war robot, and then they are actually going to move up. Now, they normally have a move of 5, as on their stat list, but I can move them 2.5 in this rough ground, so I'm going to move them to there. So each model, when it is activated, gets to do 2 actions. That one there was a move action, so I'm actually going to move on to, for action 2, is a fire action, and that is going to go from this model here all the way over to this model over here, which is my opponent's heavy gunner. So the first thing I'm going to do is check that once I've declared them and once I've checked the weapons are in range and everything, that I can actually hit them. So we're looking at over the half range of the weapon, which is 18 inches. So we're definitely looking at a penalty there. The way shooting works with a model is we work out first of all what the model requires to hit, which in this case, they start off with an accuracy of 3. They have moved, which would normally be a penalty of 1, but because that's a cannon type weapon and harder to move around, it actually goes 1, 2, 3 on top. So I'm hitting on a 6 before we even look at range and cover. My opponent is at long range, as we established. They're above 18 inches. And then on top of that, my opponent is in a hard cover between me and them, so that's a further -2, taking me down to 9. Now I need to get a 9 in order to hit. Unfortunately, we've only got D6s, but don't worry, there is actually a rule for that. If I'm to roll a 6 on one of these dice, I can re-roll it, and I'm looking at getting a further number on the second dice to see if I can get a hit. In the case of a 9, I need to roll a 6, then I need to follow that 6 up with a 4. So we're going to roll and see what happens. I have 4 shots from this weapon, and I don't get a single 6. So in this case, that's the end of that fire action. That's the 2 actions done for the model, and then play now passes to my opponent because we're on a 1 activation per player turn. For my opponent's activation, they're actually going to get a little bit of revenge with the heavy gunner, so we're going to take their activation token away. Now their first action is going to be a shoot back at my robot, or my war robot over here. Now my opponent in this case starts out hitting on a 3. There is heavy cover, so it goes up to a 5, and then it's also long range, so there'll be an extra 1 penalty to make it a 6. Now in this case, my opponent also with that model has a special rule that if the first action in the first action for them is a fire action, they can re-roll 1s. So my opponent's going to be hitting on 6s, re-rolling 1s. So my opponent has 2 1s there that they can re-roll into a single 6. So what happens when a model gets hit is we take a dice, we roll against their armor, which in this case is a 3+, and we promptly pass it with a 6. So if I was to fail that, I would potentially take damage based on the weapon. It would normally be 1 strike, but in this case, a weapon can actually potentially do 2, 3, 4 more strikes depending on the weapon's special rules. With their second action, my opponent is actually going to go for a move instead of a shoot again, and they're going to go to there, and then they only have a 4-inch move with a heavy gunner because he's lugging all that extra equipment and ammo around, but they can comfortably get themselves there. For my next activation, because again, it's a 1 player or 1 model per player pass activation, I'm going to take this model here, and I'm going to use their special rule because every model comes with some sort of special rule. In this case, this model has a special action. Now I can draw line of sight, if we come across the table, to this model. So I'm going to declare my strafing run onto this model, meaning that they and all other models that are both within 3 inches of the model and line of sight, I now roll a dice 4. So I'm going to get some ready and start rolling. For this model here, on a 1 to 2, it does nothing. On a 3-4, it takes a single strike, and on a 5-6, it takes 2 strikes. So starting with my opponent's leader, nothing happens to them. Moving on to this one without the helmet, they take 2 strikes. Moving on to this ex-soldier here with the flame weapon or chemical weapon, they take 2 strikes. And this model at the back here doesn't take any strikes at all. So it's a 2 strike and 2 strike for them, which I'm going to mark up. What we'll do is we will count down. So these models here both start at, put that one there so it's easier to get, but they both start at 6, so they're down to 4. So my opponent is going to activate their leader, comms operator here. They're going to jump through this window, and then they're going to move up 2 inches, which would get them to here. Now, we take that away. Now the reason why they're doing that is because when they fire, they can target this model here who's quite in the open. Okay, it is long range and a move penalty, which is take their hitting on 3s down to hitting on 5s, but it does mean that if they get a hit, when another model near them targets the same model, there's actually a chance they can make the shot more accurate. So my opponent's going to move on to their next action, which is going to be a fire action. So 3 shots, long range, and moved already means they'll be hitting on 5s. Ooh, and unfortunately they don't, so that means they won't be able to give the benefit to the other models around them either. So here we're going to show you what happens when you activate a leader, which my opponent did with their comms operator, but we're going to show you the leader additional activation rules. So this model here, being my leader, how many times I can say that, I don't know, but they're going to activate, then they're also going to declare a friendly model within 4 inches, which is this one, who's also going to activate with them, meaning I get 1 more activation than I'd be allowed to have, which in this case is 2 models. It does mean, however, that the leader has to go first. So I'm going to take their activation away, have them move up 1 inch, over for 4, and then along for another inch, and I'm actually going to move them again with a second action to here. Then I'm going to do the same with this one and follow suit with a move action, over, and then we're going to use another move action from there, and we're going to get them up like that. So in that case, as you can see there, I've used my leader to activate, and then my leader has activated another model with them and allowed them to both move up to a new position. My opponent has decided they're going to activate the Grenadier here. Take the counter away. And then we've measured that with the full 12 inches they can move, because it's 6 for one move and 6 for the other. It gets them all the way around, and drop them completely, and into here, where they can be very well hidden from all of my models. For my next activation, I'm going to activate this model here, give him 2 actions. First action, I'm only going to shift him up to this hedge here, because I kind of wanted him a bit closer, but the deployment didn't allow it. Then I'm going to use his second action as a fire action and shoot over at this model here. Now, I think what I've possibly done... No, I haven't. I haven't moved myself into the short range, so it's still long range. So we're looking at starting on a 3 for this model. We're looking at long range, have moved, but with a cannon. And then we're looking at the additional heavy cover. So similar to this model over here, this robot firing at them, this is also going to be on 9s, as it were. So I get 4 shots from my energy cannon, none of which hit. So yeah, in this case, my model has missed. So my opponent is then going to activate one of their assassins, the red-shirted one here, appropriate colour for him, and he's then going to do a double move. So he moves 6 normally, so he's going to be able to make a full 12-inch move and get himself in there where I cannot see him with this heavy gunner to shoot at him. For my next activation, I'm going to activate this worker robot here, and I'm going to double move them. What we're going to do is go... just can't, with his 5 double, that only gets him to 10, and that's not enough to move up and then jump over that hedge. So instead, I'm just going to move him straight over into this corner here. So my opponent has decided with this model here, this assassin, they are also going to double move, which is 6 plus 6 making 12, and they're going to go and get themselves there, nestled in against that building. So I'll take their activation away, and that's them done. So for my next activation, it's going to be this ex-soldier here. Now he is going to fire with his ballistic rifle, which all the way over is going to go into this heavy gunner here. Now I start hitting on a 3, but it is both long range and there's at least the heaviest cover or the hardest cover available is this hard cover here. This means I would go down to a 6, because -2 for the cover and -1 for the long range. But the ex-soldier special rule is that if the first action is a fire action, he ignores the penalty for being between half and maximum range of the gun, or long range as we refer to it. So I'm actually hitting on 5s. So I do get a hit against my opponent. My opponent now has to take an armor roll, which for them is a 4+, which they promptly fail. Now because I'm using a rifle weapon, it has a special rule. If I roll a 1, 2, 3, the opponent takes 1 strike. If I roll a 4, 5, 6, they take 2. So in this case, my opponent takes 2 strikes, putting them down to 4. And there we go, that's my first shot. So for my second action, I am going to do a fire action again, but there's a couple of little caveats to this. First of all, the penalty that I ignored there, the long range penalty, will come back into effect because it's only for the first action if it's a fire action. And on top of that, there is a rule that, or there is a penalty that if you've already performed a fire or move action, there's a -1. So my hitting on 5s now goes to hitting on 7s. So I'm looking at a 6 first of all. Neither of which I get. If I got a 6, I could have then re-rolled that. If I got a 2 or more, I would have actually got the hit on that model. My opponent's next activation is going to be this model here, which is an ex-soldier with a chemical launcher, and they're going to use a double move to go to this hedge, over, and then they're going to be able to get just to here while keeping away from their friend. But they will take their strikes with them. Now, as I have to activate a model, and I have only one model left in this heavy gunner, I've realised that it's not actually beneficial for him to do anything this turn and wait until next turn when my opponent can move into range and he can get some shots off. So I'm just going to give him a move action and then a move action. He's basically just going to stay on the spot. The move action says you can move up to the move of the model. It doesn't mean that you can't just simply use it to move 0 inches twice. So my opponent has decided that now they're going to use their drop trooper model because I've done all my actions, which means I won't be able to shoot at them at all or do anything this turn. So we're going to take the model and their token, and then we're going to put the model up here, where my opponent can see down into my leader and down into that war robot. Actually, we're going to just do it like that so they can see more things. And then the activation token, that's both their actions used to drop in out of the sky. So we've already worked this out off camera, but my opponent's ex-soldier here for their first action is going to move, which is going to put them to there through rough ground, out there for an inch, and there for the remaining one. The second action is going to be a shot all the way over here into this model, who is definitely not getting any cover at all because of, well, there's literally nothing in the way. However, my opponent now gets 3 shots with their ballistic carbine. They're going to be hitting on 3s normally. They have already just moved with a move action, and they are long range. They don't, with the ex-soldier, ignore the penalty unless the first action is a fire action. And unfortunately, in that case, needing 5s to hit, they don't hit. If the comms operator had got a hit earlier, they could have actually hit with that 4, but unfortunately the comms operator also failed to hit, meaning they don't get anything from this. So last activation of the turn is this model here, this ex-soldier. They're going to move along here and jump over, and then stand in such a way that they can fire without hitting their friends, but they can now fire at this fleet officer. So again, it's move, and it is long range, so they are looking at 5s, but they're really trying to get shots into this fleet officer after what he did. Again, unfortunately, my opponent does not hit. So that actually is the end of turn 1. Now these are 5-turn games normally, so we only have 4 left to try and get rid of as many opponents as we can. I've managed to blink off a few wounds here and there, but it might not actually end up being that much in the end. So what we now do, as it is the end of the turn, we're about to go into a new turn, is we start marking back up each of our models so that in the next turn they can be picked for giving actions and activations. So as you can see, we're now in turn 2, and that is all the models marked back up again, ready for activation. So my opponent and I are going to roll off to see who has the priority and what the activations are. My opponent sort of rolls a 6 there. I rolled a 3, so in this case it stays as being a 1 activation per player before passover, but it does mean that my opponent has priority, meaning they will be getting to do the first activation of turn 2. So my opponent, after a little bit of back and forth with really where to go first, has decided to start with their leader, who I'm going to take the activation away. They're also going to activate this ex-soldier here as part of the leader being allowed to activate another model. But first of all, we're going to start with the leader, who's going to fire all the way over into this fleet officer over here. Now they are at long range, which means they'll be hitting on 4s. Okay, they've hit 3 times. I'm going to roll to see what happens. So I only have a 5 of armor. Now I know he's armored, as well armored as all the other models, but unfortunately I didn't really have a more convincing fleet officer. Speaking of, I have failed all 3 of those, so I am actually down to just 2 strikes remaining. I'll place that on his token. Doubt he's going to be there much longer. So my opponent's leader is going to fire again. Now in this case they would hit on 5s because originally they'd hit on 4s, 3s, 4 with the long range, 5 having already shot. They do not give their own bonus to themselves, but they do give to other models. So in that case they've got 2 hits on me, so I'm going to roll again with my 5-up armor. I pass 1, so that leaves me on a grand total of 1 single strike remaining. However, my opponent did declare this model who was going to go after they had activated their leader with their leader's additional activation option. And that means that this ex-soldier is now going to fire into my poor fleet officer on 1 wound. The model here would hit normally on a 3. The only penalty is long range, which they ignore for being an ex-soldier, and because the comms operator got a hit on this model, and this ex-soldier is within 3 inches of this comms operator and is shooting at the same model, they get a further +1 to hit, or +1 to -1 to their accuracy, which essentially means +1 to hit, meaning they're going to hit here on 2s. Wow, it's glad they did, because I've got 1 armor save to make on a 5, which I promptly fail. So even after that rather poor shooting, I am still dead. So I take this model away. What I also do is I take away their activation, because now that the model has been removed, a counter also goes with them. Now after that, my opponent still actually has a second action with this model, so they're going to move them 5. Now it is in the open, or it might seem like it's in the open, but it actually stops them from being seen completely by that heavy gunner who originally did have a line of sight on them. So for my first activation, it's going to be this war robot here, this worker robot, who is going to go into here and into this rough ground. Now he's going in here, so I've actually worked out that's the only way he's going to be able to see this model and be in the 6-inch range of the chemical pistol, which is there. Now he starts hitting on a 4. The weapon is at long range, and I have just made a move. My opponent is also getting heavy cover, which would take me all the way up to hitting on 8s, but the chemical pistol gets a +3 to its, or actually what it gets is a -3 on focus. Now focus you take away from the number you're adding here. Most of the weapons we've been firing have been focus 0, but this one here, the chemical weapons usually have a far lower focus. So I go from all of that back down to 5s in this case. So 3 shots, helps if I hold them properly. 3 shots hitting on 5s. Okay, so that's 1 hit, and because it's a chemical weapon, it strips my opponent of their armor roll, so they just take a single bit of damage. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pop it there above them, because they've now taken 1 of their 5 strikes, putting down to 4. Next, going over to my opponent's side, they're going to activate this model here, and they're now going to fire 3 shots from the energy carbine into this model down here. Now the energy carbine behaves in the same way as the ballistic one, except that it will actually get a -1 to any armor roll that I take. So looking at 3s to hit, because I'm in the open to them, all of them hit. I'm looking at 5s and 6s, because my armor's normally a 4, but the energy makes this a -1. I got triple 1. Wow, that was impressively bad. So I'm going to mark that model up with having taken 3 strikes, and then my opponent, I think, is actually going to roll again. So in this case, it'll be 3s down to 4s because they've already used a fire action this turn. They've hit with all of them. I have passed 2s. That's not bad. I only take 1 in total. So I've lost 4 strikes in that shooting. So coming over to my activation, or my attempt at an activation, my leader is going to do a similar thing to what my opponent did, which is they're going to fire twice, and then also we're going to decide to activate this model as well with them. So we'll start with the leader first of all, who's going to fire their energy or their ballistic rifle twice into this guy, who is long range and hard cover, which takes it down to a 6. So no hits. And then the second round of shooting is going to be on 7s. So I get a 6, but now I've got to roll this again. Okay, so I do get, well, I would need a 2+ to get the full 7. It's easy if you think of rolling above the number that you're looking to get. So a 6 plus the number you roll would be above 7, 8, 9, that sort of thing. My opponent has one armor save, or one armor roll at which they pass because it's a 4+, but they are marked for that shooting. Coming back to it, we are now going to fire this model here because we did declare them for the extra activation. They're going to get 2 shots. They'll be hitting on 3s, 4s for long range, which they ignore, and then it would have gone 4-5 for cover, but because they're within range of him and targeting the same model he hit, it does actually go back down. So in this case, it's actually going to go down to 4s. So I'm looking at 2 shots hitting on 4s, neither of which hit. I just realised I've not been playing my ZMC special rule. He is currently the one holding an objective, or holding that quarter objective for that side, so I do get to re-roll the first one on these rolls. No, I've missed. On top of that, I'm going to shoot again, which would be 3 hard cover, long range taken up to a 6, back to 5 because of the +1 from him, back up again because I've already shot, so it would go to 6s. Okay, I get a hit. So my opponent's looking at a 4-up armor on that model, which they pass. So I, unlike my opponent, didn't really do much with my double shooting. My opponent has decided that they're going to activate this model here, and they're going to shoot, which is just short range at 15 inches, into this leader, or my comms operator, which is my leader over here. So what they're looking at is hard cover only, which means they'll be hitting on 5s, but they get to reroll 1s because it's a heavy gunner, and their first action is a fire action. Doesn't matter, they've got 3 hits on me. So I'm looking at 4s to save, because that's my armor. That's none of them. So my opponent now gets to roll a dice for each one I failed. If they roll a 1, 2, 3, I take 1 strike. If they roll a 4, 5, 6, I take 2. So my opponent rolls, what's that, a 1 in 8 chance that they will outright kill me in one go. Which they've done. So that is my leader, has taken 6 strikes in total, all in one go, and has been ripped apart by that cannon. And because they are already activated, I can just take one of the tokens that we've already taken off and pop it with them. So my opponent has decided they were originally going to shoot then move, but after it being such a devastating couple of hits that they got, they're instead going to fire again, but they're going to focus down on firing on this ex-soldier here. So they'd be looking at 3s, but then 4, 5 for cover, and then 6s because they've already shot or already fired a different model, which in this case they don't get any hits. So after a lot of back and forth again trying to work this one out, this heavy gunner is actually going to fire, with hard cover mind you, at this drop trooper that dropped in up here. So that does mean I'll be hitting on 5s, but I will be re-rolling 1s because it is my first fire action with a heavy gunner, or my first action as a fire action with a heavy gunner. Okay, so I've hit twice. Now this is an energy big bore cannon, so my opponent is actually at -1 to their save, meaning it's going to be 5s for them to save rather than their usual 4s. So they pass 1, fail 1. So because it's a big bore which behaves in the same as a rifle, it means I can cause a second strike on a 4, 5 or 6, which I don't, so that model only takes 1 strike. However, what we're going to do, because it would go straight up to 6s for having already performed a fire action, is I'm going to fire at them again. No rerolls this time. Okay, so I could have done with the 5s earlier instead of 6s, but it's fine. I have missed with all those shots, and I'll take my activation away. So my opponent has decided this model over here is going to activate and is going to double move and put themselves there. So they're definitely getting cover, and they're quite out the way and in this corner. So for my activation, I'm going to take this one away here, and then I'm going to fire all 4 of the shots from the energy big bore cannon into this ex-soldier at the back here. So we're looking at 5s to hit because of the heavy cover, but that's the only penalty, or the hard cover. I do get to reroll 1s. Okay, so that's 2, which my opponent now has 2 saves on a -1, so 4 down to a 5 because of the energy weapon. They have failed both, so we're looking here at, because it's a big bore cannon, same thing with the rifles, that if I get 4, 5s and 6s, these do 2 damage per. Ooh, and I've just got it, and my opponent is just on 4. So, unfortunately, that guy has gone. But I suppose it's not too bad for my opponent. They have lost 1 model to my 2, and I started with less. We almost moved on to another activation without realising that this model only had one action in order to get rid of that other model. So with the second, they're going to fire again, and they're going to fire all the way over at this guy. However, it is going to be 7s because of long range, cover, and the fact the model has already fired. I'm gonna re-roll these to see if I get any 1s, because that will not hit for the 7s. Okay, so 3 of them have hit, so my opponent now needs to take 3 armor rolls at -1. Looking on 5s and 6s here. So they've saved 2. Again, this is a big bore cannon, so I need to roll to see what happens. And I've just done 4 strikes again. That's how you even a playing field. My opponent has decided to activate their Grenadier, and they're going to run them to there, where they can cover that corner, but they also cannot be seen by any of the models that I've got left on the table. One more activation for me, which is going to be this war robot here. Energy big bore cannon, same as these other 2 heavy gunners, is going to fire up here. Now he won't get the reroll 1s, but he will hit on 5s because we've got only the hard cover penalty up here. I did not get a single hit. So I'm going to try again, hitting on 6s with my second action. I get 1 hit. Oh, 1 hit, which is actually what I needed, so my opponent now rolls to see what happens. They fail, so I do a single damage to them in this case. So somehow we went from one guy firing and taking out 2 models to one firing twice and skimming a single wound off another. So my opponent has decided that they're going to move the assassin that's in here. So I'm going to take this activation counter away and take him out. Now he's going to move around here, jump over here. With his full 12-inch movement and double move, he can very easily get himself to there so he can set up an attack for next turn. For the last activation on my side, I'm going to take this counter here and then have this guy move for 1, jump over for 4, move again for 1 inch, and then with the remaining 5 on a second move, he's going to get himself to, let's say, just about there. So we've just quickly moved these bridges out the way for my opponent's last move with the assassin, because he's going to go 1 inch, over for 4, round here for the remaining 2 of his first move, and then with his second 6-inch move, he's going to run around like this and try and start the next turn in base contact or within combat range or attack range of them, so that he can try and attack him and then safely hop over the barrier and leave. As we can see, that is the end of a rather brutal turn 2, with us both losing, 2 models each in turn 2. What we're going to do is we're going to quickly mark back up the models that are still on the table, then we're going to go into Determination Shattered Morale, which is done before rolling for who gets priority, and that's the system for morale within this game. So you might actually get to see it, hopefully you might actually get to see it this game. So as I said, start of turn 3, the first thing we do is the Determination, which could lead to Shattered Morale. Now what would normally happen is I would roll 2 dice, picking the highest, and if the highest was equal to or above, if the highest was lower than the number of models removed, so in this case if I was to roll double 1, I would suffer from Shattered Morale for this turn. Unfortunately, one of the models removed is my leader, meaning I only get to roll 1 dice, so whatever I roll on that 1 dice is my determination. Thankfully, it is, I'm just going to slide it back on, a 2, which is fine because that is equal to or greater than the number of models I have lost. For my opponent, we have a rather different story. So they have lost 2 models, of which neither is their leader, so they will get to roll 2 dice and pick the best, or the highest. However, because of the Bloodstone Mercenaries special rule, if the dice roll is equal to, then it counts as a failure rather than a pass. So my opponent, if they roll double 1 and 2, will actually fail here. No, even one of those is enough to pass the determination for this turn. So now that's out of the way, we roll to see who has priority. I'm thinking in this case my opponent really wants it. They might get it with that 4. They are going to re-roll, so we'll roll and see what they get. A 4, a 1 for me. So again, it is my opponent who gets the disc, and the difference is an odd number, so it stays at number 1, or 1 activation per pass. Very start of turn 3 for the first activation. My opponent is going to activate. I'm going to use an attack action from this model here into this model. Now the way attack actions work, this model has a combat stat of 5, so it gets to roll 5 dice, which my opponent is now going to do. Okay, so my opponent hits because they're the one initiating the attack action. They hit on 3s. Because they're a Bloodstone Mercenary, they can re-roll one of these per action, which unfortunately, these two fail. Now what happens here is that these two, I have to make an armor roll against because they passed. However, my opponent has an energy blade, which is a piece of equipment they can buy, so these will go down from my regular 3-up armor for him to a 4-up armor. So I failed one of them. This one here, because the Assassin Special Rule, is an additional -1, so this one takes me down to a 5, which I pass. So in total, I take 1 damage, putting me down to 5. However, the difference with an attack action is that I now get to attack back with my 3 combat. The only difference is because I didn't initiate the attack action, I hit on 5s and 6s. So I get 1 hit, my opponent gets a 5-up armor to ignore because that's their armor, which they do, so my opponent takes no damage in response. Now what my opponent can decide to do is go for a second attack action to do that all again, which I think they are actually going to do. So on camera I'm just going to quickly hand them their 5 dice back. They're going to roll and see what happens. Okay, so they can re-roll one of these for being a Bloodstone Mercenary. Okay, this case it's slightly different. We have 1 that's at -2 and 3 that are at -1. So we'll roll for these 3. I take 2 damage there. And we'll roll for this one, which will be a 5, 3 down to a 5. I take that as well, so that's 3 in total, putting me down to 2. But I do now get to attack back with my 3 combat. None of which hit, unfortunately, so actually my opponent's done rather well there to initiate the combat. Now, for my activation, it's going to be this model here is going to activate, and they're going to fire at the assassin. However, one of my models is within 1 inch. So the way this is handled is we work out what the model here would require to hit. In this case, it's a 3 because we're not within a really short range to get a bonus, but we're not getting any penalties either. So I would hit on 3s. However, for every shot that rolls a 2 or 1 under the requirement to hit, it will hit this model instead. If there was multiple of my models in the way, I would randomize between them. But in this case, I don't have to. I know that he's going to take the hit. So hopefully I'm not going to roll any 2s, but we'll see. Okay, so I roll a 2 and hit my own guy, but I also roll 3 that will hit my opponent. So the ones that hit my opponent will be -1, taking them down to a 6. So they pass 2. Oh, sorry, they pass 1. So these do double damage. One of which, okay, so my model would take 3 in total, putting them down to a 2. However, I also did hit my own guy, so I'm going to have to take an armor roll for him on a 5, 4 down to a 5 for energy weapon, which I promptly fail, and watch me do double damage to my own model. Yay! I thought that would happen. So yes, unfortunately, I did cost the life of my own model there. However, if you read the rules and read the fluff about the Zeta Mining Corporation, that is actually about on par for what they do. Now, with that, the only thing is, I'm going to fire again, because there's not really a point in me not just using the second action to fire again into that model, but I will be hitting on 4s because I've already made a fire action. Okay, I've hit twice, so my opponent is going to need its 6s to save. It's -1 to their armor. They don't save either of them, so there's no point in me rolling to see if I do extra damage. So with that, my opponent is going to activate this model here, and then is going to use a double move, which will get them all the way down to there. Now, the main reason for this is because the only models I really have left at this point are strong shooting models, so they're actually trying to capitalize on having 1 more model than me and getting the objectives. In my case, I'm going to activate this model here, and I'm going to have them fight in combat against the assassin. So I have 3 attacks with my worker robot, hitting them with its big servo fist. all of which hit. So my opponent has 3 saves to make, which will be on 5s and 6s for their armor. So unfortunately, they made none of them. Now, the way the worker robot works is it has a attack action version of the big bore and rifle weapons. So if I roll a 4, 5, or 6 on each of these, it's 2 damage. I only really need to make one of them to do the 4 strikes required. I made 2 of them, so that will be 5 strikes and the model is out. But as I remove them, me and my opponent are fighting over an obstacle, and the rules for fighting over an obstacle is the opponent would still get to attack back, even if I manage to remove them in one go. So then I'm going to roll. So they get 1, but they do get to re-roll 1 of these. So they get a grand total of 1, against which I would have -1 for an energy blade and -1 for an assassin rolling a 6, which I fail, so I promptly go down to having 1 remaining. So because that fight was only 1 action, I've actually moved this model here round and out to here. My opponent for their activation is going to activate this model here, and is going to just shuffle him a little bit along because there's not really much else for him to do at this point. So coming back to myself, this war robot here is going to activate, and they are going to hop over for 3, move forward for another 2, and then I'm going to use another move action. You can do a thing called a double move, which is where you just make 2 moves consecutively in case you get like stuck halfway up a wall or something. But in this case, we've mostly just been making separate moves each time. And actually, I can't get him there, so he's just going to move around to... we'll put him there. There we go. That's his move. So for my opponent, they're going to activate this model here, and they're going to move in and around into that corner, so they can keep Overwatch down these alleys. So for my activation, this model here is going to double move and go to there. So my opponent has decided this ex-soldier here is going to take some shots at this war robot. They're actually looking at 5s because the is hard cover in the way, but that's the only penalty. Ooh, my opponent has rolled 2. So I get my 3 up armor, so I'm looking at a 3 or more, or my armor value is a 3. Statistically bad. Yep, that is me 2 damage taken, only had 1 left anyway, and that is the war robot gone. Then with the second action, my opponent has done a little move to go from there to there. So for my activation, this model here is going to go, we'll call that sort of like 2 to drop down. And then he's going to make a move for 2, and then another move, which will get him a further 4, and he's just going to move himself, he's going to move himself up to there. So my opponent's going to activate this model here, and it seems like a weird one, but what they're actually going to do is use a double move, so 5 will get them to there, and then a further 5 they can get to here. Now, the reason for all this is because if I go first next round, I can't really get into a place to shoot them properly. If they go first, they can come and get into combat with me, lock me down, and take this corner. So it might actually be beneficial for them to lock me down using combat rather than anything else. So with that, we are actually at the end of turn 3. So what we're going to do is we're just going to remark up all the models, and then we'll go into the determination for round 4. As we come into turn 4, dice over there says turn 3, that is clearly wrong. I need to roll for my determination. Now, as we saw last turn, my leader is out, so it's on 1 dice, and I need to roll equal to or above the number of models removed. So I've rolled a 6, so in this case I am okay. As for my opponent, they do have 4 models removed as well, however none of them are their leader, so they get to roll 2 dice and pick the highest. So in this case, they would pick the 5. Now, if it was a 4 and something else, they would fail because the Bloodstone Mercenaries, like I say, have to roll above, which means that the 5, perfectly okay. So as we're in turn 4, let's see who gets priority and how many activations it is. My opponent rolls a 1, I roll a 3. So the difference is an even number in my favour. So it's actually 2 activations before I pass to another player, starting with me. For my 2 activations, I am first of all going to activate this guy here, the heavy gunner. He's going to move in there for 1 of his moves, And he's actually going to move to here for the second one so that he can have this area of fire that he can cover in the 5th turn. As for my second activation, I'm going to shift this guy 4 inches like that, and then I am at long range. I'm going to fire with my second set of action, or my second action, from him to this model here. Now, I definitely know for a fact that it's higher than 7s because I'm on 3s normally. Hard cover makes it 5, or heavy cover, yeah, hard cover makes it 5. Move of the special weapon makes it 8, and long range makes it 9. So I'm actually going to be hitting on 9s here. So looking for 6s. Not a single one. However, I do get a reroll for the Zeta Mining Corporation I keep forgetting about. I can reroll one of these ones. Also does nothing. So for my opponent's 2 activations that they get, the first one is this model, the Grenadier, who's going to go inside the building. I can easily do that with 2 moves. Then the second one is this model over here, the comms operator, who is the leader. They're just going to use 2 move activations and just move nowhere each time. So for my 2 activations, which is actually my last 2 activations, because I only have 4 models left, this model here is going to do a double move, which we've measured already, can get him to there. So he's going to be in base contact with that Grenadier. And then this robot here is going to move into the doorway and then move through this rough ground with 2 moves, which will get them, they're underneath, but we're just going to place them on top for the moment so that they are actually where they need to be, but they are actually down here in this bit. So for my opponents, actually in this case it's going to be my opponent gets all 3 activations because they're going last, they'll be activating 2, and there's only 3 models left on the board. So we're going to activate this guy here, who is going to run out this doorway, round here, and is actually going to place himself right in there. Now he's not able to be seen by this model, we have made sure of that, but what I will do is I will pop his counter and number on the top there. So actually that model there, the ex-soldier, we've slightly moved him back a bit because it turned out this heavy gunner had line of sight to him. Both of us completely missed that until the last second. So I've been nice to my opponent and let them move the model further back into the corner where he can't be seen by either of these 2 gunners. Next, this model here, this ex-soldier, is going to move to there where he cannot be seen by this heavy gunner or by the robot, war robot back over there. And for the last bit, my opponent is just going to have this model hop the hedge, run round and go there so that they can secure that side but not be seen by my war robot. So as we can see, it's a bit cat and mouse on these last few turns, but that is me and my opponent ready to go into turn 5, which will be the last turn of this game. All games of Death Among the Stars are 5 turns long. So once again, we are in a new turn, turn 5, and it's time to roll for determination. 1 dice for me, because my leader is still out of the game, he doesn't come back. I have failed. So, for the rest of this turn, my side has shattered morale. That means that my accuracy is at +1 for all my models, meaning it's +1 harder for me to hit, and my combat is -1 to a minimum of 1, meaning I roll less dice as part of an attack action. As for my opponent, they're still rolling 2 dice, pick the best, and they have had 4 models out. So actually they're exactly the same. So for the final turn of the game, we both have shattered morale. It has been quite back and forth in terms of models lost. So let's see how it goes into the last turn. As we come into the last turn, let's see who gets priority. My opponent rolls a 1. I roll a 2, so it's me first with 1 activation, and then I pass to my opponent for their 1 activation. So for my 1 activation, this guy here is going to move down and fire over the hedge into this guy hiding in here. However, let's work this out. It is going to be a 3 to start with, minus or +3 for moving with a heavy weapon to make 6, +2 for the cover makes 8, +1 for the shattered morale makes 9. It would have been 10 if it was the long range, but it isn't, so we're looking at a 9 here. Okay, I'm going to re-roll one of these for being Zeta Mining Corporation, and then I'm going to roll this and try and essentially beat a 9 with 6+. No, that's an 8, so that does not beat a 9. So, for a bit of humour, my opponent has decided to activate this model and is going to go and attack me. They would normally have 2 combat, but they're down to 1 combat because well, we both failed our determination. Reroll for being a Bloodstone mercenary. That's a hit. That's a pass from me. I'll attack back on a 5. I fail to hit and I don't get any rerolls. My opponent is going to just do it again, so 1 attack. And from me, yep, passed. And then 5 and 6 to hit back. No. So there we go. That is that. So I'm going to attack my opponent back, and they're just going to take that counter away. 1 attack, hits. They fail their armor, and then they can do their 1 attack back at me on a 5 with a reroll. I'll count that. I fail as well. And then I'm just going to do another attack action, which hits. My opponent passes, and then they get to attack back, hitting on a 5, which they reroll. And I pass my armor for that. So after all that, we did a grand total of 1 damage to each other, which is not surprising at all. Next, my opponent is going to activate this model hiding in the house and is going to shoot at this guy over here, or this model over here, looking at 6s because of cover and the determination failure. Saying that, they do get 2 hits. I will roll 2 saves of 4+. Pass 1, fail 1 in, he does 1 damage, so where he does 1 strike. So I've taken 1 of my 6. With that, my opponent has also decided to use the second action to just move this model back into this corner here where I can't see them. So for my activation, this robot is going to jump out the window and then move 2 inches, which will get him to there. And then he is going to, open fire. And just take that token away. So he is now going to open fire into this model here. Now, he's hitting on 3s normally. He has moved with a heavy weapon, so that would take him down, or moved with a cannon, so that would take him down to 6s, 7, 8 for the cover, 9 for the determination failure. But because I'm now within 4 inches when I take the shot, I go back up 1, so I'd be hitting on 8s in this case, which is impossible, but hey, we've seen stranger things happen already. And I get to reroll one of these for Zeta Mining Corporation, but it doesn't make a difference. It was a bit of a lucky try, but sometimes these things happen. Nothing there. So as this is the last turn and me and my opponent have sat and worked it out, what's actually going to happen for the activations is this comms operator is just going to shuffle over to here. So they're in this side of the board. Then I'm going to activate all the way over here with my heavy gunner. My heavy gunner is not actually going to be able to either see or shoot at anyone. So unfortunately, I'm just going to take his counter away and have him stay put. Then what my opponent would do with this model here, this ex-soldier, is just rush them around behind my heavy gunner like this. And then that way they would secure more quarters than I can secure. And then this model over here, he's already perfectly poised and exactly where he needs to be. With that, we are at the end of the battle report, and as we can see, this corner over here, we've measured up. My opponent holds with 1 model. This one over here, my opponent also holds with 2 models to my 1. Over on this side, my opponent and I are actually tied for this corner because we have 2 models for them and 2 models for me. And then finally on this side, I have this corner because I have 1 model sitting just over here. So in that case, we have 1 to me, 1 drawn, and 2 to my opponent, which means that my opponent, as the Bloodstone Mercenaries, wins this game. Well, as you can see, that is it. That is the end of this battle report for Death Among the Stars. I hope those of you watching have actually got a better handle now on how the new activation system works, where you have both the random potential for 2 activations before a player pass, or 1 activation for a player pass, and whoever goes first in each turn. We also tried to showcase as much of the other rules as we could. Obviously, there's not some rules or some model types that we have on the table today, but they will of course be featured in the rules when they are released. Now, speaking of that, we are now at a point where after a couple more minor changes, this will be the rules ready to go to the beautification process, where we're going to add in the pictures, we're going to add in the backgrounds, we're going to add in all the textures and details so that it looks nice and presentable to people. Other than that, We do have another game, which is Age of Alchemy, which is currently released. If you look in the video in the links below, you will see the links to the Patreon page where you can look at signing up for that. If you're interested in Death Among the Stars, you can follow us on Facebook. You can also follow us, or you can subscribe to the channel here and like the video. What we will then do is we will do another couple of battle reports with different models or different groups that we can play as, and then we will slowly build up to the actual release of the game, which we're hoping to be in the start of next year. It was originally trying to be the end of this year, but a couple of things unfortunately have pushed that back a little bit. So with all that said and done, thank you very much from myself and my opponent behind the camera for watching, and we will see you in the next battle report, which will be an Age of Alchemy battle report, as usual, on the Sunday. So thank you very much everyone, and goodbye.